Just 20 seconds ago, I got a text from my son, who's on a school bus, and he said, a bit early in the morning, hope people turn up. Thank you very much for coming. Now, we seldom look up into the sky. We seldom get excited and rush out and wait for the pouring rain. And we seldom wake up our kids when they're just about to go to bed and take them outside into the lawn and make them sit on the grass and make them look up into the stars and try and find the Southern Cross. Now, I can't talk for any of you out there, but I have never done any of those things. I have never sat on a cold, black rock on the Altai Mountains, freezing my backside off for hours on end, and watched these incredible black clouds carrying the first snow dance across the range. I've never sat on a beach and not read a book, not watched a movie, not had a big plate of food, and not have the New York Times podcast curling in my head. I've never done any of those things. Now, that was until a few years ago. Something happened to me, and I'd like to tell you about it. My beautiful young daughter thinks that old age came knocking. Perhaps she is right. I never looked to find an answer for that. I didn't go and read the book. I did not go and read, go and find a documentary. I didn't go to the Himalayas. I didn't fall in love. I even didn't go to a world summit like this to find it. What I did was I went to Mongolia. Now, I did a book project called Hunting with Eagles, and it was a book project about the last remaining 50 to 60 men in the Altais who hunt the red fox using the golden eagles. So I spent 5 years on that project. So if you can imagine a map of Mongolia, and the very northwest of Mongolia, where Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Russia, and China meet, that's where I went for my project. It was a 5 to 6 year project. It's a long story, and I don't have time to tell you about it, but I like to tell you about one particular story of one man, and his simple words changed my life. And I'm still trying to figure out why that has happened. So his name was Ongar. He's handsome, he's a 55-year-old man, and he lives up in the Altai Mountains. And I went and visited him many times, and in one of those times, we went off hunting. I didn't go hunting, he went hunting. I was taking the photographs. And we were going to go and camping in the Altais for 3 or 4 days. And we'd been riding on a horseback for the whole day. And at the end of the day, we ended up on top of a mountain. And we were all sitting on some rocks. And I was asking him a whole bunch of questions. And one of the questions I asked him was, what does he do? He spends all this time away from his family, by himself, in the middle of absolutely nowhere. What goes through his mind? What does he do? And he answered back that he listens to the wind. Now, that moved me. I totally, straight away, understood where that came from. Because I felt like my journey, I'm 50 years old, my journey had brought me to the point where I was ready to understand what that meant. He pointed towards some tall grass, and he told me that I listened to the grass, I listened to the skies, and I listened to the mountains, and laughed. I remember sitting on that rock with him, and I was cold, I was hungry, I was tired, I was emotional. I felt close to my God, and I totally understood the meaning of what he said, and it had a profound effect on me, not just on my being, but it had a profound effect on my photography and my art. It had a profound effect on the kind of things that I wanted to photograph. It had a profound impact on the art that I wanted to surround myself with. Now, I'd like to pause for 1 second and put you all on a rocket ship and take you to Hong Kong. Now, you're probably wondering, what on earth do we want to go to Hong Kong for? And what on earth this wind and moment of peace and clouds and all those things that I just spoke about, what has that got to do with Hong Kong, especially given what is happening at the moment? Well, I'm here to tell you that it has everything to do with Hong Kong. It's the way that I choose at my 50-year-old stage as a photographer to look at Hong Kong. So, I lived in Hong Kong for over 10 years, in the late 90s, and then in the last 8 years. In the last 3 months, I moved to Dubai. I have done 3 photographic books just on Hong Kong. And the first one was called Daily Life, which was a reportage, black and white collection of images of everything that is quintessentially Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Ballet, the Star Ferry, the construction site, everything that I thought was Hong Kong. And the second book was called Vivid, which was a very color-rich, dense book on Hong Kong. But the interesting thing about that was it was the first book ever of its kind anywhere in the world that was shot on an iPhone. Everyone thought I was completely crazy. Why on earth would you want to take photos on your phone? No one's going to do that. And the publisher thought I was crazy to do it. If you want to make a phone call, use your phone. If you want to take a photograph, you take a real camera to take a photograph. And those two things are never going to work together. But I convinced my publisher, and the book came out, and I'm happy to tell you that it's been quite successful. And the third book, which I really want to talk to you about, is called Wind, Water. And a lot of the images that you saw in that slideshow was from that book. Now, wind, water, if you don't know, means feng shui. Now, I am no expert on feng shui, far from it. But what I did for this book was I took the elements of feng shui very, very loosely, and I stretched them like a rubber band as far as I could, and photographically looked at Hong Kong through those elements. Wind, water, mist, contours of mountains. I'm sure a lot of you here have been to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong, 70% of Hong Kong is national parks. Yes, it's got that crazy Causeway Bay, peak hour side to it, but so much of Hong Kong is green and lush. It's got mountains and it's got beautiful clouds that move through it, different all times during the year. And as you can tell, I love that city and I miss it dearly. And I wanted to look at Hong Kong not through the people, but with movement and wind and clouds and so forth. So I like to show you a couple of images and talk about it briefly. Hopefully get this right. So that image is a cover image of my book. And that was shot landing on a Qantas plane from Sydney into Hong Kong. Always have a camera next to you when you're sitting in a plane, and always ask for a window seat and make sure that the window is clean, not one of those old ones with scratches on it. It's very difficult to photograph from a screen because a lot of things need to happen for it to work. All you need is a lady sitting across there reading something, and you have a reflection on the screen. But this, I was very fortunate. We were landing, and the clouds beautifully framed Hong Kong. And if you look at it, if you know Hong Kong, on the left-hand side, you've got Causeway Bay and Wan Chai, and there was an incredible storm taking place. And on the right-hand side, in Kennedy Town, there was another storm. But the ICC tower was beautifully lit, and it was one of these great moments that really captured, for me, the clouds that I wanted to photograph Hong Kong with. So one of my favorite times to be in Hong Kong is when it rains, when there are typhoons. So when I hear there is a typhoon, I get very excited, and I'm the only one out in the street because I feel like it's a real privilege to be somewhere and you're the only ones witnessing it. And this one was just in the start of a typhoon, and we were in the last ferry, and you get to see a city very, very differently when it's raining and when it's got mist and when it's got fog and in the early mornings and the late afternoons. And I love photographing cities in bad, quote-unquote, light conditions. And a lot of these images really need to be seen in silence. Now, art and photography sits at its very core, means different things to different people. We've all been in a gallery, and we've all stood in an art gallery and looked at a beautiful piece of drawing, or a photograph, or a lithograph, and we've been completely moved by it. Why is that? And I struggle to answer that question. Why do I stand in front of one of Salgado's photographs, and why do I feel like crying? I don't know why. The closest answer that I could give myself is that I think it's the journey that you've been on. Your life journey leads you to that point where you can relate to something that you see, and you're so deeply moved by what you see. And sometimes, I don't know about you, I stand there and I look at a photograph and I can see there is a place within the image for me that I could just step into. And that's the connection, and that's the power of art to me. Now, let me give you an example before my time runs out. So I was born in Madras in South India, and I was brought to Australia when I was a little kid, and I grew up in Sydney. And ever since I can remember, from a very early age, I used to sneak off into the New South Wales Art Gallery, and I would never tell my rugby friends what I was doing. And I would walk around the art gallery. Sometimes I would walk around and not even see the art. I would walk around because that building brought me great sense of peace. I didn't really understand, but I loved being in there. And there were these 3 paintings by a very important Australian artist, Drysdale. And I remember those 3 paintings when I was a kid. I even wrote about it for my exams at school. But I never stood there and looked at them. I walked past them. Until about 20 years ago, when I found myself standing in front of a Drysdale and staring at it and thinking how incredibly beautiful it was. And every time I go to Sydney, I go there and I stand there for 20 minutes sometimes and look at these 3 incredible, important pieces of art, Australian art. And why is that? Now, I'd like to leave you with this thought. The paintings haven't changed, it's that I've changed. And I think that is the most amazing thing about art. And that's why we should surround ourselves with art that will pick us up when we are down. Thank you very much.